Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to Better Life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me are Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold. It is so good, always so good to have you here so that together we can discuss or break down this really important concepts, right? And I'm here to talk about the concept of solitude, but also the concept of loneliness. Some of the questions that come to my mind are: what's the definition of solitude? What are some emotional impacts? How do we differently suffer from either one? What are some of the social aspects? Are there any health impacts? Before we start our conversation in earnest, I would like to thank all of you who are here today listening to our podcast. And if this is the first time you're joining us, please note our program is a weekly talk based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. And the program is sponsored by TV Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. But I'm here with you again, right? After thanking our sponsors, and wanted to bring to our attention here the importance, how really critical it is for us to understand those concepts, because loneliness is indeed a universal human experience, as Joanna de Angelis says, right? She mentions this feeling as hunger or thirst. And I was just thinking about it. What is it, though? It's a natural feeling. It is a signal that something is missing from our lives. In this case, what's missing is something so important: human connection. We all experience loneliness, but if you think about it, some of us don't experience it well, right? There are issues including acute or chronic loneliness, and there are also very specific groups of people that are more vulnerable than others, like the elderly or the marginalized community, etc. And I just wanted to say before I ask Jussara and Anahy to speak about it, that there is this project that was created in 2015 here in the US. It's called Project Unlonely, and it highlights exactly the health risks associated with loneliness and social isolation. So, as you can see, this is something that is really important for us to talk about. Joanna de Angelis calls loneliness the cruel specter from the landscape of fear. And I thought to myself, my goodness, this is really important. Let's flip it a little bit to not so somber discussion when we think about Brene Brown, the American researcher and professor, an amazing storyteller, because she addresses solitude when she states that solitude is a place. It's a place we choose. Loneliness is a feeling. It's a feeling we often have when we think we should be with other people. So let's talk a little bit about it. I was thinking about you, Jussara. Maybe you can start talking about the difference between what is loneliness, what is solitude. How can we better understand those two concepts?
So, hi everyone. Hi, Marcia, Anahy. It's really great to be here again. And this is such a wonderful topic. And just by you mentioning now one of the quotes by Joanna de Angelis relating loneliness to fear, um, you see, something came to my mind because it's so amazing because many times we hide ourselves for fear of something and we try to hide from the world with a fear of being discovered with this discovering our inner emotions, and we don't want people to see how we are, and this is, well, it could be one of the reasons, of course, that it would lead us to loneliness. But as you explained very well, it's very important for us to differentiate loneliness
Mhm.
from solitude. They are not the same thing. Maybe it means you seeing a person by oneself or more in quiet or even in isolation, but the emotional charge are very different.
Yes.
So the emotional charge that we are talking about, solitude, normally comes from a very positive way, because it can lead us to those feelings of peace, clarity, and really trying to get to know ourselves. Whereas when we talk about the emotional charge of loneliness, most of the time they are associated with something negative, like
Mm-hmm.
the idea that somehow I do not belong to the world, or I cannot fit in any of the groups that I try to have any kind of
Mm-hmm.
relationship, or it can be out as a result of shyness as well. But in this case is also unhealthy, because if you let your shyness be so much in the way as you not to be looking for healthy relationships, of course you are going to be ending feeling this kind of loneliness. So um, one, we would say, is by choice. So solitude is by choice.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to, to enjoy moments that I will be just me and myself, right? Thinking, maybe not even doing anything, or meditating, or just listening to a music, just feeling myself, which I have to admit has been quite difficult for us living in the 21st century, because all the time the phone is buzzing, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
prevents us to have this one-on-one with ourselves, where we, in loneliness, it is not by choice necessarily. It is by some kind of deficiency, whether because we have this low self-esteem, whether because we create this image that we do not belong, and
Yeah.
with that we kind of contribute to impair any kind of relationship we might have, or maybe we are too needy. We do have relationships, good ones,
Mm-hmm.
but it's never enough. There is an emptiness within ourselves that somehow we don't feel that can be fulfilled. But I will pass on to Anahy, because I think in this field she's the expert, right?
Anaí, what are your thoughts? Do you
So,
want to maybe bring the idea that loneliness can be so acute that can lead the feelings of loneliness, right? Can be so acute that it can lead to some sort of illness, or that requires maybe moments for healing. What are your thoughts on that as well?
yes, first of all, hello everyone. So it's great to be here with you again. Yes, I was listening to Jussara and to you, Marcia, and we see in our clinical work, okay, with lots and lots of patients,
Mm-hmm.
the feelings of loneliness, they are very they hurt, they are
Yeah.
hurtful. And they are feelings from the ego. As a Jungian analyst, I'm always thinking both ways. What the ego feels and process, and the perceptions of the ego from the outside world and from within. Like loneliness is something that I feel inside myself, right? I can be among a lot of people and feel very, very lonely and disconnected from people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I feel loneliness, everyone, I think, will feel a little depressed, if not a lot depressed, if loneliness is persistent, right? And maybe anxious, right? So the feeling of loneliness is something that the ego, it's very painful for the ego, and it can be from past traumas, for instance, that I am among friends sometimes, and but if I don't feel I belong, or if I feel like people are leaving me, they are leaving me because I'm not interested enough. Many times has to do with low self-esteem, right? And projection also, because if I feel that people are not including me because I'm not interesting enough, or because whatever reason I'm feeling disconnected from people,
Mm-hmm.
let's pay attention, because I don't know what people are thinking. So probably it's some kind of a projection, some kind of some complex that I have, some difficulty that I'm projecting onto others. And this is, for instance, the basic stuff in bullying situations, right? Because people project onto other, oh, I don't want to, of course it's unconscious, but I don't want to have those characteristics, because otherwise, if I have them, people won't like me, right? So I deny that I have, and I see, or I project onto others. Usually somebody that is quiet, that it's, timid or things like that. And then I start bullying that person because I deny that I have some of these characteristics. So this is the basic. Anyone that is bullying, I'm sorry to tell you, people that, oh, but it's so cool, or I'm cool, I don't like the, especially teenagers and people, and in this age of the ego, that the ego is trying to adapt a lot. So if I'm practicing bullying, if I'm displeased with someone, don't look to the person that you are rejecting. Look inside yourself, because it's inside ourselves that there are some aspects that are bothering or making us worried that we are not going to be loved. And I have to pay attention to myself. I cannot change others, but I certainly can change myself. That's all the basic stuff that we in Joanna calls us to do a lot. Pay attention to your inner world, and
Yes.
Jung does the same, because in your inner world you are the king or queen or whatever. You are the captain of your own ship, so you can do whatever, and you can evolve, you can accept, you can integrate aspects, you can say, wow, that's me, maybe I don't like what I'm seeing, but I can change. And whereas if I pay attention to outside world, to other people, what they do and what they don't do, and criticize all the time, I can't do anything about others, but I certainly can do a lot about myself. So coming to what you and Jussara were, you guys were talking about solitude, then we see that it's so important, because loneliness, we feel like negative because all this psychological stuff going on, all the projections, all the feelings of being left alone, so depression, anxiety. But solitude, it's much needed. I totally sympathize and empathize with what Jussara was saying, that it's so noisy outside of the whole time, that we don't have solitude, this time to be alone with ourselves, connected and searching for the inner connection, for the inner voice, for the higher self, and the inner voice that tells us what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, all the wise stuff that we have inside of ourselves. So I think solitude is much needed. And I think loneliness, of course, we see a lot, as I told you guys, in clinical work, because you always have to go look for why are you feeling so lonely, especially with spiritism knowledge that we know we are never alone. In
Mm-hmm.
a good sense, right, Jussara? And sometimes in a not very good sense. If we are not very, balanced, then we can connect others that are unbalanced. But we are never alone. So I think the feeling of loneliness is a psychological problem, especially nowadays, but it's also a spiritual problem. because we are so disconnected with ourselves, our inner world, especially our spiritual world, our spiritual knowledge, that then we don't have, the time for solitude, for meditation, prayers, reconnection. I don't know. I think maybe Jussara would like to say something about that.
Jussara, you are on mute.
I tried that. I thought that I muted myself. Um, yeah, and I think all of that, the topics that you've brought about, it leads us to think so much. Of course, the subject is so deep. And while you were talking, I was thinking that, of course, one of the aims of this podcast is always to try to bring help and comfort. This is the main aim of Spiritism, and the Spirit Joanna de Angelis as well is not here to give us a whip to be whipping ourselves because we are not doing the things the way we should, but just for us to reflect. And Joanna de Angelis comes with one phrase in relation to loneliness, that she says that loneliness, so when we are feeling lonely, many times can be or can represent a call from the soul for a spiritual connection and deeper understanding of life's purpose. So, what were you trying to say here, or how do we interpret this thought by Joanna de Angelis? I think in the sense that sometimes we may feel lonely because we want to follow trends. We want to follow people that perhaps we call the influencers of today. But what if we do not attune with those people? And the more we force ourselves to belong in those circles, the more we are going to feel lonely. So it's not necessarily because the world is not open to you, that there are no people that will sympathize with you or become your friend, or share things of common interest, but it's because we are searching in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
We are searching for things to fulfill our emptiness that is more related to a call from the soul to say, look, is this the way that you want to go? These are the kind of people that you want to have a relationship. And we force and we force, and somehow, even if we can be good fakers, it will come time that they will notice, because our energy is going to be differing from their energy, and somehow we are going to be putting aside, which is a great favor they do to us. So don't force yourself to belong to a certain circle just because it seems that is what we will have to do today. Think that the more we live in a material world, we have to provide for ourselves. We have commitments to fulfill. We have the commitment of the soul as well. And if we don't look for something more to try to understand more ourselves, our inner desires, in the sense that the soul is claiming for something more, for something more meaningful. And this is why somehow, like it's commonly said, you may feel lonely even when you are surrounded by countless people,
Yeah.
followers, and I mean, you can be in a position of power and you still feel lonely because you're not hearing the inner voice. This is when loneliness can lead you to solitude as being the way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, Marcia.
No, no, no. I really appreciate where you're going, because the biggest paradox that we live today is, on one hand, this incredible need to belong, and when we don't, when you talked about bullying, right, and it hurts my heart to even think of all the children that are bullied. But what you're mentioning here, to all of us to hear loud and clear, the person who's actually the instrument of bullying is also just simply projecting their own sense of inadequacy. So we're all suffering some sort of ill fit in our society. But in so many words, we have a society in this paradox that is hyper connected, right? Hyper connected. We've never been disconnected before in the history of our civilization. And yet we're the most loneliest. And because we're so distracted by external inputs, we are disconnected not only from one another, but also from ourselves. We don't have either people, therefore we're lonely, but most importantly, we don't have that safety to be okay, to be by ourselves, to look at our own company, our own thoughts, the silence of solitude. I think, if I may cite Leon Denis in his book, The Problem of Life and Destiny, and I love him because he's so poetic. He says, in the silence of solitude, the soul hears the divine voice that guides and sustains it. It is in this quiet moment that the soul can truly understand the purpose of its existence and the lessons it must learn. So I love it. I love the whole concept. Yet we still have to deal with the fact that we hurt, like you said, Anahy, we hurt when we're lonely. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about are there any conditions from a medical perspective that we should be aware of?
Yes, and I was listening, but before I tell you one very interesting condition,
uh,
in Awake and Be Happy, I think it's name in English, of Joanna's book,
yeah.
she has a wonderful sentence that I was listening to you guys, and where she says social life is inherent in the process of evolution of human beings, incarnated or not, since no one achieves spiritual fulfillment by following alone. So I was listening to guys and remembering that we need each other to evolve for our spiritual evolution. It's not by chance that we are, fraternity, compassion, all the spiritual values are bring us peace when we are in contact with them, right? And so I think this is so important that we are talking about. And I think it's great the way that you put solitude as a path
Mhm.
for this connection, the connection that we need to develop among all of us as brothers and sisters, because it's not only outside to look to people, but to understand that we are deeply connected. We are all interconnected, and this what we call the collective unconscious, the transpersonal dimension of the psyche, is where psychically or psychologically speaking and spiritually speaking, we are in this dimension. We can understand and feel that we all have the same symbols, images. We live the same archetypal experiences, right? So we are one in this sense. So we need solitude, as Jussara was saying, as a path that Joanna is, and also you talked about Leon Denis, beautiful sentence. So as a path to our soul, so our spiritual purpose in this life, and to feel this deep connection among all of us that are here in this dimension and in the spiritual dimension, because Joanna says, incarnated or not, we need each other, right? In the different dimensions of life, we are all interconnected and in deep relationship with each other. So, in coming to the ego, where we live the experience of this in space and time, and in the material world, but we are here to learn, right? So, as Marcia was saying, I was listening to you, and I remember a cardiac syndrome
Mm-hmm.
that it's called Takotsubo syndrome. Okay, it was described first in Japan in 1990 by a Japanese scientist, and it's because taco, it's octopus in Japanese. I don't know if the pronunciation in Japanese is the same, but people from Japan, sorry, it's but it's a very we call in Brazil, and I think probably in the United States too, the broken heart syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it's a syndrome that it's a condition characterized by acute left ventricular dysfunction. That the left ventricle is the one that it's pumping most hardly the blood to the rest of the body. And it can be hard to distinguish from acute myocardial infarction. Okay. So, and what it's interesting, because, the symptoms from
Mm-hmm.
infarction, it's very similar, like pain in the chest, like shortness of breath, like tiredness, palpitations. But when you look at it, it's not the same. And the reason is because, of course, if you go to the scientific, the peer review, scientific research and literature, they say, oh, we don't know, we cannot, we don't quite understand the reason. But that's something that Brazilians have, because we are such a people, very warm in a sense, very extroverted, always hugging and kissing. It's pretty Brazilian. And I found some, because I remember, why do we call broken heart? So when I went to see in the literature from the US, they don't quite call it broken heart. But in Brazil, the cardiologists call broken heart because the hormones of stress are very high,
Mm-hmm.
like adrenaline, cortisol, and usually it is men and women, it doesn't matter, but mostly women from a certain postmenopausal, from, like 40 and ahead, but it can be any time, or male or female. And the thing is that it's usually related in some articles, scientific articles, with high levels of emotional stress, especially the loss of somebody very near to your heart, and broken relationships, for instance. Okay. So that's why a popular is called the broken heart disease. And also, I think it's very interesting, because also the mortality, and morbidity, it's very high in these patients too. So it's really broken heart, people. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not because of the coronary occlusion or something like that. That's the difference. So you need to do exams and things like that. But I think it's very interesting, because we know from researches, also from the night is on, but people don't talk much about that. That a lot of neurons, so the nervous cells, were found in the heart. Like what I found is like 40,000 neurons in the heart. And it was not thought that neurons we have only in the brain. At least when I was in medical school many decades ago, it was supposed neurons were only, part of the brain tissue. And now we know there are lots of neurons. And I have also found some scientists saying that the electromagnetic field from the heart is much stronger than from the brain. I think a lot of researches are being done in this field. I'm not a cardiologist, but as a psychiatrist, I think it's very interesting because neurons are the intelligent cells of the body. Well, all the cells are intelligent in the body,
Correct. Yes.
but in terms of processing information from the outside and and from inside, of course, but especially we are talking about relationships, right? And processing information and feelings, because when we say I'm very sad, I lost something very dear to my heart, I lost someone or something actually, or very dear to my heart, very important. And I broke up with someone that I love so much, or somebody just moved away from me. We don't show to our heads, oh, my head is hurting. If my head is hurting, I take a Tylenol or something, right? But we show the heart and we point, sorry, to the heart, and we say, my heart is hurting. And now the medical field is showing, yes, your heart is, because there is information. It used to be only a matter of speaking, right? Or only symbolic, but the physiology of the body is saying, no, your heart is really hurting, because your heart has neurons and has when we talk about electromagnetic field, I automatically I think in André Luiz, the spirit that has a lot of books that Chico Xavier psychographed, and he said he was a medical person, but in spirituality, and he gave a lot of medical information to Chico Xavier I think it started in the 40s, right? She started in 1940 something.
I think
And
maybe even earlier, Anahy. So, for
may,
anyone who does not know him,
yeah,
Chico Xavier is one of the most prolific Brazilian medium, and he has, through a psychography or automatic writing, written over 400 books. And one of the series of books that he brought was through Andre Luiz, this medical person from the spiritual dimension, talking, giving a lot of gifts, right, Anaí, with to anyone in the medical field, that he was able to, through Chico Xavier, bring to us such an enormous amount of information. So it's a good example there as well. Go ahead, Anaí. Sorry for
yeah,
the
and that,
disruption.
no,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much, because I wouldn't be able to, all this information to process. So, well, I myself, with other colleagues, we stayed like 8 years studying only André Luiz and the medical information. And there are lots of Brazilians, medical people, and medical
Mhm.
doctors that even the PhD and stuff like that, and research in all the information that came many decades previously to the medical field, discover some of the information, like in the information that Chico Xavier gave about the pineal gland, for instance.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
not our topic today. But just to say that he talks a lot, André Luiz, about the electromagnetic field, okay, in the body, and a lot of information. So if you can imagine so many neurons and we know that neurons are, and also the pump in the heart, so that all the mechanism in the heart, of course, it produces a very strong electromagnetic field. And we know that our perception of the spiritual realms are through this, this contact in electromagnetic field. That's why the pineal gland and stuff like that. I think this is a very kind of maybe difficult for some people, and people can look, and Jussara can talk a little bit about that. But my point is that we are just in the beginning of discovering the way that our body, that's the temple of our souls, right, connect with ourselves, first of all, in solitude with our souls, connect with others, right? With information coming, spiritual, emotional, lots of information, material information coming, from different people, and connect with the spiritual dimensions. So it's so beautiful. We have so much to learn. But we can think that in solitude, as Joanna says, we have a lot of information, because as Jussara and you, Marcia, were talking about, it's in solitude that we connect to our souls and to our spiritual knowledge, right? And the spiritual knowledge that it's coming from the spiritual realms. So I think the noise, the outside world, if, as Jussara said, if you are not tuned with the noise of the outside world for whatever reason, and you are not feeling in peace with yourself, then don't stay in this, with these people, or in this, if you can leave when you can. Oh, but I'm going to be lonely and people won't love me or whatever. But I totally agree with Jussara. You are going to find the right people and the right connections. And it's never been so important for us to reconnect with the right people, with the right, in a sense of, tuned emotions, and the sense of peace that people can give you in a healthy relationship. So we need to do that with ourselves and with others. And let's not suffer from broken hearts. This is
Yeah.
from Takotsubo, the
Yeah.
Takotsubos. But it's just an example how we can suffer in our physical bodies because of emotions and feelings of helplessness, of loneliness, of depression, and also not in actually suffer in our psyche too. But I would love to hear you guys about that.
Yeah. And I was going to ask Josada, maybe um, the counter discussion here may be that, okay, we started with loneliness, and then the ability to learn, because it may be a learned attribute or capability to be able to communicate, to connect with yourself, to go deep within. And I'm thinking, Josada, that right, when we talked about us human beings as biosocial beings, we are actually physically, like you mentioned, Anahy, there is a syndrome for us that are somehow feeling at a loss, the loss of a loved one, etc., etc. But what happens when we are inserted in a situation, in a social context that makes us afraid, and it's easier perhaps to isolate ourselves, right, to avoid contact. It's easier to control, instead of being exposed to, I don't know, to being rejected, exposed to be bullied, exposed to whatever is out there. And I was just thinking, if you don't mind talking a little bit about it, the from this chaotic environment that we may be part of, often at least it's my experience right now in my professional world, where it's a very diverse community. It's great, but then we are also facing with a multitude of conflicts, confrontations, right? And I keep thinking, I just want a confirmation here. Somehow, just being in this quote unquote air quote here, a soup of all of the different types of people, including being receiving microaggressions, right? Um, it's a way that we can also exercise our emotional muscles, where we can start to look into feelings of tolerance or kindness or, of course, compassion. What are your thoughts, Jussara, on that realm of social relationships?
Well, I'm thinking about those that are listening to us that may be feeling in this kind of state of
Hmm.
loneliness. And as we started this podcast, we emphasized the difference between, you being alone because you feel this need, you're being in solitude because you wanted to have time to explore yourself more, to have a more spiritual connection, anything that emotionally, spiritually speaking, you are going to gain. And as Anahy talked it and showed to us as well, even physically, because when we go in the opposite direction, we our body will feel the consequences. As when I'm going the direction of, self-analyzing, that will lead me to self-love as well. This is healing. This
Yeah.
is healing ourselves. This is healing, the the body, the cells, the neurons, everything. And of course, I mean, we can't, or maybe very few can. Um, but in any case, we shouldn't live in isolation, because we live in society, because we have to learn from one another and we have to contribute with one another.
Hmm.
Being the altruistic emotion, one of the most important ones, that will also contribute for us feeling better about ourselves and not feeling that no that lonely, because we are thinking about others. And even if others are not by ourselves, I mean, the image, the sense of others, the sense that I can do something to help, it should be enough to fulfill us. So in this sense, how can we actually live in the world and not have those emotions, considering everything that the world gives us, right? I mean, things, situations that can impact us so much. But you see, the world can give you anything, but you are not obliged to accept it. So, in relationships with others, in situations like we live in the world, I'm not obliged to accept them all. I'm not obliged to get myself in a state of despair, of losing hope, of feeling, that, this low self esteem, anything. And one of the things that we said at the beginning, that loneliness is a state of mind. So, who controls the mind? Or who can control the mind or should control the mind? Is only us.
Hmm.
So if I'm allowing others to do that, so control your minds, love yourselves, allow yourselves to feel lonely sometimes, because this is life. We all are going to experience so many different emotions, but they make us grow, and then transform loneliness into a period where maybe I need to take a break from the world right now and my relationships, but I'm not going to take a break from me, and I'm not going to give up on me, and I'm going to, use this moment of solitude now to get the better out of me.
Love it, love it. We are at time, so just wanted to maybe give my own thoughts as we say goodbye, which is the idea that fear of loneliness should give way to confidence, like you said, Jussara, like confidence on what are your values, what are your paths for the content within, and maybe even seek the teachings of Jesus, right? And our ultimate psychotherapist, because he's the one who suggested love one's neighbor to the same extent that you love yourself. So, first, we need to love ourselves, and then we also need to love those around us, and learning to love through whatever means necessary. And by that, I mean that that chaotic environment that we may see ourselves in requires an exercise, a muscle of a loving muscle, if you will. But I wanted to open just before we say goodbye, uh, just invitation for any final thoughts from either of you.
Well, I'll just follow Jussara, and I think it's exactly that. And remember what Joanna de Angelis says, that when we evolve, when we find inner peace and in solitude, right? We are talking about that. And plenitude, she talks also about, that we feel whole and we feel connected to the source, to our Father, our the spiritual world, our friends and benefactors in spiritual world, then we can help others. We cannot help others if we don't do the inner work of finding ourselves and finding peace and finding plenitude. So that's what I wish to everyone. And really, I totally agree with you. Let's trust ourselves, our souls, because that's the way. Thank you.
Just add any final words to
Yeah,
everyone?
the final words would be you may feel lonely, but you don't have to go through that alone. So look for help in the, spiritual, emotional, physical uh, areas, and don't stay by yourself. And there is help that can come to you, and sometimes, like we said, it can be um, a byproduct of a depression or something. So look for emotional help, look for spiritual help, and talk to a doctor, because all of those things, and talk to friends as well, talk to family, all of those things are going to help in this sense.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Jussara. Thank you, Anahy. It's beautiful discussion on solitude and loneliness, how they counter each other, but there is room for both in the silence that we need to bring to ourselves, the ability to bring silence to ourselves and get to know who we are, connect with who we are. With that, I want to say thank you, and I'll see you next week in our next podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
I